Hi everybody, welcome to this month's Hare's Corner Clinic. I'm Finn, I help coordinate the Hare's Corner, and with me I have Sharon, who I think you all know, who is scientific advisor to the Hare's Corner, and Sophia Couchman, who is one of our new Hare's Corner advisors, who's going to be giving a presentation today um, for you. I had a mix up with the title anyway, so which is my bad. So it actually isn't managing invasives. It's on improving biodiversity on a variety of land uses is our amended title for today. But if anybody emailed in questions, we'll still go through those at the end. And we can take, I suppose, questions on sort of land management for pollinators and for improving biodiversity. Someone says very bad echo. I hope nobody else is getting too much of that. No, okay, good. That's fine then. So thank you, Ron. So for those of you who haven't been to one of these clinics before, we hold them every month, and it's just a space where anybody can come and ask questions on managing land for wildlife and for nature. And they're sponsored by Life's Too Good Foundation, which is how we make them free. So we're very grateful for that. So yeah, I won't natter on too long. We'll have a presentation and then we'll move to our Q&A afterwards. So I'll hand it over to you, Sophia.
So hi everyone. I will try and share my slides. That should be that one. Just let me know whether that comes up. Is that coming up okay?
It's just your desktop at the moment.
Oh, that's no good. Okay, hang on. I'll share my other screen. I think this will be you now. There,
Yeah.
is that right?
Yeah, it's not presentation mode yet, but we can
There we
see.
go.
There we go, yeah.
Is that right?
We can also see your little slides on the side.
Do you know what I've done? It's because I shared the wrong side with you. So it has to be the desktop. And now when I share it,
There we go.
There.
It's
No,
classic when you do it in practice, it always works.
I know, exactly. Right, so does that look okay? Let's get single slide.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Sophia Couchman. Just to give you a little background, I actually grew up on a farm down in County Carlow, and I grew up with sheep, and we also had hay which we then made for racehorses. And then I went traveling and I was abroad for a long time, and I kind of saw the destruction that we were doing to the planet. So I ended up going to university as a very mature student. And then I worked as an ecologist for 3 years with a construction firm, but it meant I was doing lots of ecology surveys on mammals and habitats and birds, and I learned a huge amount. And then I saw a PhD advertised by Kildare County Council, and it was basically wanting to improve biodiversity, and I thought, that's for me. So I have just finished it. So I'm basically going to give you a really quick run through of some of the things that I found over the last 4 years of the PhD. So basically the premise was to come up with ways to improve biodiversity on public open spaces. So this project was funded by Kildare County Council, and I was based in Maynooth University, but I also had Professor Jane Stout in Trinity giving me a hand, which was great. There are two main sections to this PhD. One was looking at pollinators, and I was using pollinators as proxies for biodiversity. And then I was also looking at glyphosate and the alternatives for glyphosate, because county councils really they know that potentially legislation is coming through. So they wanted to find alternative ways. For example, in the bottom right-hand photograph there, the road verge, how do you reduce plant species in a situation like that? So going back then to section A, top left, chapter 1 on pollinators, I was looking at low intensity farmland in County Kildare, which again is managed by Kildare County Council, versus town parks. And then bottom left, I was looking at chapter 2, looking at roundabouts. So I had a wildflower roundabout that had been planted with wildflower seeds back in 2014. And then I was comparing that to what I called an ornamental roundabout, which basically had one or two shrub species, and then the rest of the roundabout was basically mown, frequently mown. And then top right, chapter 3, I was looking at the effects of glyphosate and alternative treatments on the vegetation above ground, but also on the soil fungi and bacteria in the soil itself. And then chapter 4, the bottom right, that was a sort of in situ experiment along road verge to see which of the treatments worked best for trying to remove the vegetation. So 8% of the land in Ireland is owned and managed by county councils, but also Bord na Móna and Coillte. And the map on the right just shows the little blue sites are all the areas that are actually currently managed by them on our behalf. County councils in Ireland manage 1.2%, so they are in a unique position to try and improve biodiversity where possible. They also manage a lot of the road verges. So if we could connect up all these little habitats, it would make a huge difference for pollinators in particularly, and plants, which are really slow moving species. They're not like birds that can find another habitat easily just by flying. So then chapters 1 and 2, I was looking at the four pollinator groups. So I was assessing the bumblebees, butterflies, hoverflies, and solitary bees. And I was looking at how many there were, but also how many different species, the diversity of the different bumblebees on each of my sites. So in 2021, I conducted habitat surveys on all my sites. So I was looking at how tall the hedgerows were, how wide they were, how many species were in them. Same for the grasslands, little woodlands, any habitats that were on sites. And then for the following 2 summers, I was doing pollinator surveys to try and figure out how many and how many there were on each of the sites. So this is looking then at chapter 1, which was the agricultural site versus the town park. And again, just note that the agricultural site in this situation was very low intensity managed. So you can see the grasslands there. They were only cut late summer, early autumn. The hedgerows were unmanaged, so that you can see in that picture, they're all really wild, lots of flowers on them. They were really tall. Whereas you can see the town park in the bottom right-hand photograph, that was frequently mown grassland. Now, not all the sites were like that. They did have areas which had been left to grow long, but the trees were also often cut and branches were cut off them. So it was a very, very different management scenarios on both of those sites. So the results, basically, there were far more species, both abundance and the diversity of species on my agricultural sites. And of note were the butterflies and hoverflies on the agricultural grasslands. And I think there are a number of reasons for this. I think the semi-natural habitats, as I've just said, things like the hedgerows were in really good condition. But also there were a lot of veteran trees, and of course now it's very hard to keep those mature trees, particularly in town parks. I do understand there's risk of danger of them falling in storms, but veteran trees in particular are incredibly important for species like hoverflies. And there were also a lot of wetlands on the agricultural sites, so there'd be little ponds or even water troughs, which we know are really valuable, again, for pollinators, but also for species like birds. The agricultural site also, one of them had some cattle on it. Livestock are really important for biodiversity. And there was a bare bank that the cattle had created by wandering up and down it. And that had 2 species of solitary bee that were nesting in it. And the other thing that are really important too are the plant species. So bramble, 39% of all the visits by pollinators were on flowering bramble. Shows how incredibly important they are to pollinators, but also ragwort. And I know we have an issue, they are on the noxious weeds list, but they are really vital. It's been found in other studies too that that ragwort is really important for pollinators. And of course, dandelion, I'm sure you all know about No Mo May, and round me at the moment, heaps of dandelions and heaps of bumblebees, which is great. Then moving on to the second chapter, which was looking at the wildflower roundabouts. And I think this is really important to note for people who are in urban areas, but my smallest wildflower roundabout was 0.005 acres. It was really small. And yet, even though the wildflower roundabouts were 6 times smaller in area than the ornamental roundabouts, which is on the right, I had far more bumblebees and hoverflies on the wildflower roundabouts, and I had far more species of hoverfly again on the wildflower roundabouts. And I think the reasons for this is that basically the wildflower roundabouts provided flowers from the whole way through from April all the way through till September, whereas there were a number of what they call temporal gaps on the ornamental roundabouts. So you can see from the photograph there was only a single shrub species on that roundabout. So it was only providing flowers for a short 2 or 3 or 4 weeks over the summer. And then the grass was frequently mown. So the only thing to note, though, that on the ornamental roundabouts, because of the frequent mowing, there were often dandelions popping up, and that was the only species that I saw the solitary bees, which are incredibly important pollinators, actually feeding on. So the conclusions from those 2 chapters were that low-intensity farmland is incredibly valuable and can act as a refugia, so like a refuge for rare species that at least then have an area to live in. And ideally, if we can connect them all up via road verges and hedgerows, then at least they can spread to other sites. We need to somehow manage our urban areas less. Somehow got to get used to places being wild and woolly and not having to managing it and having it neat and tidy all the time. And then those chapters found that the floral resources are incredibly important, and also habitat diversity. So having, trees and shrubs and low grasses and lots of different types of habitats and different heights is really important for pollinators. These roundabouts, the wildflower roundabouts, now they had been sown with a wildflower seed mix. I absolutely do not advocate for seed mixes bought in the shop. They're finding that a lot of them are not native Irish species, so you've got to be really careful where you actually source your seed mixes from. Even going round what they called green hay transfer, which is where you've got a lovely meadow with really good mix of species, can be used for wild seed, and I think Irish seed savers, but I'm sure you guys will be able to correct me on that. And gardens and roundabouts could be really, really important again for pollinators, and we can use our roundabouts and gardens as stepping stones, and then the road verges and hedgerows as corridors for these species to move between habitats. And then going on to the glyphosate and alternatives. So bearing in mind, again, this is in a county council scenario. I know many of you are farmers, so it's a different scenario for you guys. But the reason glyphosate has been used in the past is because it's so easy to use, it's incredibly fast to apply, and it is highly effective. And they reckon that about 85% of herbicides or glyphosate in Ireland is used on farms, but that means that 15% is used in urban environments. So that's on public town parks, road verges, but also private gardens and private laneways. And the problem with glyphosate is it does break down, but it's very, very hard to actually dissolve it and have it disappear. They reckon that in some cases, 99% of it can actually be wasted, particularly if it's a windy, warm day. It ends up in our air, so we're breathing it. We know it accumulates in water, and there's been a huge amount of experiments on the impacts on aquatic creatures, and we know it damages liver and produces tumors. And we also know too that over time, glyphosate bioaccumulates in our soil. So again, it ends up in our food, and we're drinking water. They do lots of measurements in glyphosate, and it does fluctuate. But the county councils, because of this, are looking to find alternatives because of the environmental impacts. So this experiment was done on a greenfield site. You can see the left-hand picture there shows a slide of the different plots. So this was, I think, 4 months post-treatment. We were just looking at the vegetation above ground. And then the picture on the right shows the machine that we used to actually take a soil core. That's that in the bucket. We then took that back to the lab, and we were testing then the fungi and bacteria within the soil prior to treatment, but also 1 month and 4 months post-treatment. And the experiment, the treatments that we used, we had one control where we did nothing, and then we had 2 glyphosate treatments. So one was Roundup Flex, and the second was No Mix Dual. And then we also had 2 alternatives. So we had something called New Way, which is it's an acetic acid, so it's like vinegar. But we also had a hot foam treatment. So that's where the water was heated to 98 degrees, and it was mixed with an oil. And that then creates a foam, which you then spray around the plant. And because of such high temperatures, it actually explodes the cells in the plant, which is how it kills it. So some of the results, looking at the bacteria on the left-hand side of the slide, this seemed to show that hot foam, which you can see is the brown. So sorry, explain the figure to you, but this section here is prior to treatment. So this is before any of the treatments were actually applied. This was at 1 month post-treatment, and then this is at 4 months post-treatment. So I was looking at each of these different treatments in comparison to the control, but also looking at them over time. So you can see on this slide that the hot foam had considerably decreased, or I'm going to revise that, but the hot foam, the bacteria under the hot foam did decrease after 4 months. And then looking at the right-hand slide, which is basically showing the same thing, but this is for fungi. And again, you can see that the hot foam at 4 months had increased in comparison to the control. Now, the others had too, but in scientific terms, you do something called significance. But basically, the hot foam was significant in comparison to the control. But also note that over time, the no-mix, which is the blue bars, decreased over time. But I think, again, it's really important to note this was done in field experiments. So you've got a lot of other season effects like temperature and water, and they all have a big impact on bacteria and fungi within the soil. So even just to note that, prior to any of the treatments for both fungi and bacteria, you can see there's a huge difference under all of the for both fungi and bacteria without it even being treated. So it is important to note that. So the conclusions, I just came to the conclusion that there was too much variability within the soil itself, and there were too many other elements involved that could have affected the bacteria and fungi. Looking back, I'd love to have done it in the lab. You'd have controlled experiments, and temperature and water would all be same for all of your soil samples. Huge amount of research done in this area, particularly with glyphosate, not so much with the alternatives, but some of them seem to have a big impact on fungi and some on bacteria. Some glyphosate studies showed a decrease by 40% of bacteria. But often it was found to very much depend on the quantity of glyphosate used and also the type of organism that was actually studied. So it could have been earthworms, it could have been mites, and again, it could have been the fungi and bacteria. But basically, I couldn't come up with any definitive conclusions from that study. And then moving on to the road verges. So county councils are legally obliged to keep these areas free of vegetation. Hard services, as you all know, they're so common in urban environments, but they need to be kept clear of vegetation. And up until now, herbicides have been the most common method used. But county councils all across Ireland have been trying various alternatives. So with this experiment, I used the same treatments as before, but we also included mechanical treatments. But the problem is that there are very, very few viable options. Because glyphosate is so quick to use, it's therefore really cost effective. Whereas often with alternative treatments, you need repeated treatments. For something like the hot foam treatment, it's really high fuel consumption. And because the more treatments are required, they're therefore more labour intensive. So if you're scaling it up from a county council point of view, it can be incredibly expensive. So then, so there were two slight sections to this. So number one was the road verge, which basically was encroaching from either side of the road verge onto the footway and cycleway. And it was coming across at about 40 centimetres deep, and the soil itself was about 10 centimetres deep, and this is on both sides. And for these experiments, same treatments as before, so 2 glyphosate treatments, 2 alternatives, the same as before. But for this one, we added in 2 mechanical treatments. So there was a multi-hog, which had very fast, high-resolution spinning metal brushes, and the weed hex machine, which was like an edging machine, so it used to go along and cut the vegetation, and then it was sort of swept up and blown away. And you can see from the 2 photographs on the top right, so this one is showing my foot, and this is 11 months after treatment. So neither of the glyphosate treatments had any effect, neither the hot foam nor the new and I think this is because initially it potentially did kill off the vegetation, but then because of the soil, there's a really good soil bed there for the seeds to germinate, the vegetation just came back. Whereas you can see the right-hand picture shows the mechanical treatment, and this was for both machines, the multi-hog and the weed hex machines. And that's 11 months later, and there's only tiny, tiny bits of vegetation beginning to encroach. And then the second section that we looked at was this B, which is this intersection, which was about 2 centimetres wide and was gradually becoming overgrown with plants. So I've put these two slides together because the left-hand side is going back to that greenfield site, whereas this right-hand side now is just focusing on that intersection along the road verge. So the left-hand side is showing us that after 4 months, the only treatment that really had an effect was the no-mix. Whereas in the right-hand plot, in the road intersection, it was actually the Roundup Flex that was very successful, and this is 11 months post-treatment. So top left is prior to any treatment, then top right is 1 month, bottom left 5 months, and bottom right is 11 months. But it is worth noting that the hot foam did really well. I did also break this down. This is on overall vegetation cover, but I did also break it down by species. So I looked at grass species, and I looked at dandelions, and I looked at moss. And moss is what they call a pioneer species. So it'll basically find some bare ground, and then it'll germinate, and then it acts as a seedbed for other plant species then to come along. So if the county councils could just prevent the moss species from germinating, you then potentially stop all of the other plant species from germinating. So the major findings basically were that the county councils and all of us, if we all own, doesn't matter how big your garden is, however small it is, however large your farm, however small your farm, we are all in a unique position. We can all make a huge difference to enhancing, restoring, and protecting biodiversity. The low intensity farmland was incredibly important for pollinators. And we do need to learn to tolerate the untidy and unkempt. We have this image of the countryside and everything needing to be neat and tidy, but it doesn't, from a biodiversity point of view anyway. And the management approaches did definitely affect the pollinating insects in my studies. I do think the soil fungi and bacteria were affected by the weather and potentially by the pH, which again varied hugely in the soil samples that I took, even though it was all done in one single field. For the road verge and the greenfield site, the hot foam as an alternative treatment was best, but it is expensive to run. And the Roundup Flex also worked well at reducing vegetation in the road verge scenario. But again, we need to tolerate plants. And brushing, I did a huge amount of reading and research, and brushing seemed to be incredibly important to just keep your soil, your bare soil bare, and to prevent any soil building up, and also to prevent any seeds from germinating, at least if they could be swept away 2 or 3 times during the summer. That seemed to have a huge effect. The alternative treatments are far more expensive than glyphosate, but we do, though, again, know that glyphosate has huge environmental damages. But there's a study done in the Netherlands which managed to reduce the percentage of glyphosate that was lost to the aquatic, to the waterways, by 90%, by just making sure that they sprayed when there was no rainfall due for 5 hours. That made a huge difference, just having the plants have 5 hours to soak up the glyphosate rather than having it washed off. But the problem in urban environments, because you've got so many hard surfaces, if any rain comes and it's landed on the hard surface, again, it'll wash off to watercourses. And they also found in the Netherlands that if they managed to keep the glyphosate spraying away, I think it depended on the scenario and it depended on the size of the waterway, but if you could keep the glyphosate 10 meters back from a waterway, it had a huge difference. And obviously making sure that there's no wind, it really, really had a really impressive impact. And I think for farmers, if there was some way, the trouble is, I know for you it means losing land potentially, but riparian habitats, so planting trees and shrubs and allowing plants to grow along waterways would really reduce the amount of glyphosate that reaches water bodies. So then the recommendations, this was again to county councils, but again, I think it applies to all of us with gardens and living in urban areas. But again, reduce maintenance where practical. Farmers, if possible, again, I know this isn't always possible, but eliminate fertilizers and herbicides. Fertilizers in particular thickens up the sward, so it's much harder for butterflies in particular to their life cycles to lay eggs. It ends up being too dense for them and too warm and damp, and it's much harder for butterflies to go through their life cycle. I did find that water bodies, they definitely needed to be added into the town parks, the urban areas. It doesn't matter how small, even a bird bath. Bird bath would make a huge difference for the pollinators, but also the birds and the bats. We need to provide floral resources. Having flowers in the garden, I mean, that roundabout chapter really proved to me particularly how important flowers are. So long as they're, providing flowers from April through till September, October where possible. And we do need to learn to tolerate plants. So the right-hand 2 pictures just shows, the left-hand tree, the vegetation has been allowed to grow around the base of the tree, whereas the right, they've sprayed it. And you just kind of wonder, well, what effect has that had on the bacteria and the fungi and the tree itself? And also, dogs running through that area and children, what effect does it have? So from a county council point of view, the do-nothing approach, where practical, is definitely cost-effective and does improve biodiversity. And all these little habitats could make a huge difference and provide these stepping stones between all these habitats and corridors for species to move. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I didn't go on too long. And any questions?
Thanks so much. So, Sophia, that was great. Yeah. And you definitely didn't go on too long, very much.
Good.
Time. It's fine. And I'm sure Sharon would have been delighted when she heard your bit about not using wildflower seed mixes.
It's so important.
Yeah, I think anybody who's been to a few of these clinics have heard us bang on about
Mhm.
not buying wildflower seed mixes.
And just to say, it's even some of the ones that are supposedly better. They're full of things that aren't native.
Yeah.
I've yet to see a mix that I've been convinced by.
Well,
And
they say,
they're often being added in to give the colour in the first year, but there's species that just are not Irish native species, even in those mixes.
yeah. No, let them grow. They will come, given time, the native species will come. And I did notice that in the roundabouts that I think many of the species that were probably in the original packets had died out, but then we had all the native species coming in, which was really cool.
Just on the roundabout issue, I know it is something you see quite a lot. A friend of mine in Wales went along picking up all the dead bumblebees from around the roundabout plantings. So, while it's boosting food, it's going to be bringing in a lot of workers to their death if it's a busy road, a busy roundabout. So, what are the pros and cons of planting roundabouts as stepping stones?
Such a good question. And again, the costs and benefits. Um, and there are lots. I mean, you've got pollution, you've got turbulence, you've got noise, and turbulence was shown to reduce the wing sizes of honeybees in some experiments. The noise and pollution from plastic pollution, they they don't really know the effects on pollinators. But I think, funnily enough, I got asked this by one of my examiners, and I said, well, if we get another COVID hitting, or even the last few days with these truck issues, I don't know. I just think every little space counts. And yes, we probably will lose a number of species, but maybe in the long term, I just think every little bit helps, every little bit counts. And who knows, maybe public transport will take off and there'll be less traffic on the roads. Who knows? But I just think pollinators, they all need every little bit of help somehow, is my feeling on it anyway.
Then you had a couple of questions in.
Yeah, I will start with, so we've had a question in from Mike, who says he has an acre of land that is filled with hazel, fern, and a thicket of brambles. And over the years, it has effectively rewilded itself. And is there any kind of ongoing maintenance needed? Um,
Is that you, Sharon, or me?
No, that's you. You're tonight's on the box.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'd say leave it alone. I'm a big believer in leave it alone. We've got to sit in our hands and just nature. I
I,
mean, nature was there for millennia before we turned up, and it survived perfectly happily. So
yeah, and I'd absolutely concur with that. I was quite distraught at something I went along to speak at when people were talking about ripping out bramble patches to plant native Irish trees. Trouble is, those bramble patches are already established. They're going to give a long flowering season, so they support a lot of insects. They've got the fruit, supports birds, insects, small mammals. Brilliant cover. You're not going to get that same level of biodiversity benefit for a long time, if ever, from those native trees you're planting. You're not going to get that long flowering period. So sometimes it's about tolerating. Maybe if you want to plant it into the brambles, and they'll give them protection from browsers. But brambles are brilliant.
they're known as a nursery species. They've done lots of studies in the UK on them, and particularly oak trees that like light. Sycamore will happily grow in woods, but they've discovered that the brambles are actually adding exactly that as nursery species for oak tree species. And the herbivores, so they've got grazers on their land, they've got ponies and cattle and sheep, and they're not interfering with the oaks. And they've got all these oaks coming up, which is really cool. And oaks are, I mean, they support the greatest number of species in Ireland, of any other tree species. You're looking at about 2,000 to 2,500 different species, be it bats or birds or all the different insects that use the different heights of the tree. So yeah, leave it alone.
yeah, I find it interesting how there is I the normalization of like using pesticides, say, to get rid of sort of unwanted plants or plants that are seen as kind of like, say, like bracken or thistles or things that are coming up, like going to people's sites and they're like, oh, what can I do for nature on my land to, encourage it? And I was like, oh, what are you doing at the moment? And she was like, well, I've got lots of thistles coming up. And so, I put Roundup on them to keep them under control. And I was like, well, first just leave them. They're grand. Like you only have 5 or 6 at the moment. Like they're okay.
And
um,
they were another species that were really important for the pollinators. The pollinators just loved thistles. But
Hmm.
again, I
Yeah.
understand for farmers, they're a noxious species, so it's a tricky one. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
finding the
But
balance.
But there are noxious species that generally, along with ragwort, and that indicates management issues. It's
Mhm.
the management that's allowing them. It's not the weeds' fault. And in terms of the benefits of ragwort and thistles in particular, two noxious weeds to biodiversity, is huge. And an awful lot of the things like ragwort I was reading recently, the recommendations cutting the heads off before it's gone to seed. If you're doing that, you're turning it from a biannual into a perennial, so you're promoting the problem. Pulling it, you're rarely going to get all the roots out, so you're going to actually increase your problem over time unless you're doing it all the time. And it's an issue the way the legislation's written in Ireland. It's actually differently worded in Britain. Here it is an offence to be allowing these things to grow and protect and spread. Whereas Britain, it's actually written in a different way, and you don't have to do anything about it unless you get an order. Um, it just allows bad management to continue. Sorry, little rant there.
It's okay. Um, I will move on to the next question that we got emailed in, and then any questions from the audience. So we have a question from Rose, which maybe Sharon I'll give to you, and then Sophia, you can chime in if you have any other recommendations. So Rose is looking on recommendations for managing giant hogweed, which is becoming extremely widespread on their land.
I would usually say getting somebody with expertise to deal with giant hogweed. It's not something to go tackling on your own, because you need the protective gear. You need to know what you're doing. I actually would say go to one of the companies that do control it. That's my thing on that one. Not easy to deal with. I'm
Hmm.
not sure what the seed bank, how long it lasts in the seed bank is either.
Hmm.
Mm. No, I don't know, and I'd say exactly the same thing too. And Japanese knotweed.
Hmm.
Yeah, you don't want to be
Well, I mean,
messing.
there's more of a risk with the giant hogweed because of the burns. I mean, you can get minor burns from the common hogweed, but it's just you need all the protective gear and to know what you're doing and how to dispose of it once it's cut. You just can't cut and leave it. How to treat it, and unfortunately, it is probably one of the ones which is a glyphosate one, but because it's usually injected, it's more targeted in its usage.
Hmm. Um, we have another question here from Veronica on brambles, which is, I think, an interesting one. Veronica says she got brambles all around her land and she cuts the runners to stop them encroaching on the meadow. And should she just let them be?
Do you want to take it or shall I?
Well, I suppose I see this is where the dilemma is if you're farming it. So, I suppose what are you using the land for? And if you need to keep your land for grazing, then I mean, yeah, I would love to see some brambles kept, but I totally understand that you also need to keep space for your grassland. So it's a balance.
Yeah, the approach I'd usually take on a plant nature for this is having a diversity of habitats actually is going to support more biodiversity. A bramble patch will support things that grassland won't. The grassland will support things that the bramble patch won't. So if you can have both, that's what to do. So if you've got brambles, maybe decide, right, I've got those brambles there. I am prepared to let them come this far, which is essentially, I think, what you're doing already. And then I'm going to maintain them at this level. Maybe every few years I might have to push back part of it by a metre or two, but then you can do that in rotation. So you're always keeping your bramble, but you're also keeping your grassland, which is also going to be delivering for biodiversity as well. So it's about trying to keep different multiple habitats, because they're going to be doing different things, and keep that sort of different structural and complexity on a site.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Somebody said there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
similar question in relation to the encroachment of blackthorn into a meadow. Blackthorn will keep running. You can keep clipping it back. Again, I do that similar. Blackthorn's brilliant for nature. There's so many things feed on the leaves, as well. And it's important for some of our rarer butterflies and moths. So again, it's about finding that balance. It's not one thing or the other. It's about maybe trying to have both. But it does depend on different people's situations and your ability to manage it. If you can't manage it, a blackthorn will go through. Again, that's heading to be a woodland eventually.
But very lovely blackthorn woodland. I like them. Yeah, are there any questions for oh, one more question from Sharon.
Sorry, I'm hogging it. It's one of the issues again. I don't know. You might be able to give some advice or some ideas on doing plans for nature, particularly to people who are living on housing estates, and they might have a management committee, or they might decide they've got a communal grass area and they'd like to do something for nature with it. But a lot of these places, when they were built, they might not have control of the management committee, and there's companies coming in to manage the grasslands, and there's a hell of a lot of spraying going on because it's the fastest, cheapest, easiest thing for them to do. So possibilities there. And again, I was on a site which was charity owned site, huge amount of herbicides being sprayed around the pond, but all around the trees. And actually the trees were doing very, very badly because I think they were probably being stressed with the fungal damage, that they were starting to succumb to more diseases. But have you any potential, when you were working with the councils, did you come across any of these issues, sort of, it won't be the council's land, but to do with sort of housing estates with companies coming in, maybe what the people can do, if there's any way forward other than talking to them?
I didn't personally, but I know my supervisor lives on an estate in Blessington. He had real trouble, and he saw a lot of that. But I imagine you just need to get hold of the Residents Association, don't you, and try as a group to come together and suggest alternative ways of managing it. And the reasons why, I think a lot of people don't understand why we need to improve biodiversity, and that's a big issue.
And sometimes it's management companies still own those communal areas as well.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm kind of hoping with the councils are about to publish some documents on the research that I was doing. So I'm kind of hoping they use contractors as well. So maybe it'll filter down to a few of them and where it'll spread, but it all takes so long.
Yeah, it certainly does. I have a question from Catherine here, and then I have a follow-on question for you, Sophia. So maybe you can take this one, Sharon, and then I'll follow up with a question for Sophia, which is how can rushes be managed, that they are spreading a lot in the wet weather?
Well, one, if in wet weather, that helps them to germinate. Again, it's why you've got such a rush problem. Rushes usually come with soil compaction, and issues like that. Lack of any sort of grazing management can help them spread. Too overgrazing will help them to spread because it allows the seeds to get to the ground. It has the light to germinate, and with the wet weather, it depends also the situation they're in, whether it's an agricultural situation or it's a smaller situation. I was on one site a few years ago that they built a house, and if you looked at the field next door, it was 95% dense rush. Not great for biodiversity because it's gone too far. So nothing was really getting in. They'd actually used pigs to root it out. One of the other things, you can go topping them to stop them seeding and flowering and to weaken them out. They say if you really want to kill them, you cut them before very frosty weather. We never get really frosty weather anymore. But you also have to be careful then at the time you're topping, because you're going to be potentially impacting ground nesting birds and all the other things that are in the grassland. So if you could do targeted cutting, it really does depend on the situation that the rushes are in. One other thing, a lot of the farmers who have been involved in the Farming for Nature programme have planted trees. And if you plant trees, they're going to help punch through soil compaction in places. The shade rushes don't seem to like shade, but they help the drainage. So even by planting some trees, it might help you to reduce your rush problem. But it all depends on the different situations.
Mhm. And Sophia, what I was wondering if you'd looked at any like areas with a lot of rushes or sort of pollinators in wet grasslands, and I don't know maybe what the best ways to manage those areas for pollinators might be.
I did have, so I had some wet grasslands on some of my sites, but not enough to actually do the experiments on them separately. So I
Mhm.
sort of I did amalgamate my sites because I had so many different types of habitats. But from a scientific point of view, I was told that I couldn't do the experiments because I didn't have enough of those areas
Mm.
to be able to compare them to each other.
Mhm.
So sadly not. But I mean, I have all the data and I have, areas of marsh as well. But then you've got your pollinators traveling too. So, some bumblebees can fly up to 3 kilometers, they reckon, whereas some of your solitary bees are only 80 meters. Um, so yeah, no, good question. But yeah,
No. And do
really.
you know if like a very rushy, like wet grassland does have value for pollinators still, or is there a point where it gets just too rush filled?
To be honest, I don't know because I've never
Mm,
looked into it. But I'm a big believer that the more variety you have, the better.
mhm,
There will be species using those areas,
Mm.
I'm sure. But yeah.
Yeah, life isn't just about pollinators. Pollinators are very sexy, and we talk about them a lot. And generally, if you get things right for pollinators, you get things right for a lot of other animals. But if you think about a wet grassland, and we also always think about the adults, we think about the butterflies, we think about the bumblebees, but it's their offspring you really need to be thinking. If in a wet grassland, one of two of the butterflies you'll see a lot of the orange tip butterfly, if there's cuckoo flower there, and ringlet, particularly like those. Now, if you go in cutting that before the orange tips caterpillars have managed to feed, develop, and pupate, same if you cut the grass, one of the common grassland butterflies, meadow browns, really decrease because of the early cutting of grass now and mowing grass. So you might have all the adults coming in laying their eggs. With those caterpillars or whatever different types of larvae the insects have can't go all the way through to pupate, you're going to lose them. So we can't just think about food for the adults, we have to think about food for the larvae. And a wet grassland's going to support so many other things. If you go delving into the base of a dense, soft rush, there's all these amazing little fungi, little cup fungi, absolutely beautiful, grow on the rotting bases of the rushes. So again, you don't really see it, but you're going to get quite a lot of invertebrates in those structures. They might not be what we're thinking of pollinators, but you're also going to get in those situations where you've got heavier cover, more cover for small mammals. If you've got more cover for small mammals, you're going to have larger mammals. You're going to have your birds of prey, your sort of sexy, iconic species. So it's really thinking about not just pollinators and not just about adult stages. We have to look after the things that will allow them to complete their life cycle and to regenerate.
mm, yeah. And I suppose on that, like just the best bet is probably just having variety, as you said, like having a variety of different habitats, supporting all of those, like not having one or the other, just no rushes or all rushes. Someone, it's another person
Well,
saying
that might mean looking at it at a slightly larger scale than your land, like what's
yeah,
going on the
yeah,
land around you.
another person saying they'd love to get rid of their rushes, so that they can have a proper meadow. One
Well, if
and
you've got, yeah, you need to, there's something wrong. You're not, again, a proper meadow. If it's really wet and you've got rushes, what's your idea of a proper meadow?
mm,
It's this perception of what a meadow is. You're not going to have this colourful thing that we keep being presented as a meadow of cornflowers, poppies, and corn marigolds, which are arable weeds. if you've got a damp grassland, you're going to get a damp grassland meadow. They're going to be different flowers. You might get ragged robin, you might get again, it depends how wet it's going to be. Later on, you're going to get your bigger umbellifers like Angelica, that sort of thing. So sometimes we have to look at what we're starting with and be actually practical about where we can go. So a proper meadow, there is no such thing as one type of proper meadow. There's multiple types.
I've seen amazing orchids in some of those wet grasslands too.
Oh
Beautiful
yeah.
orchids.
The marsh orchids are
Yeah,
like wet grasslands.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I think they're the most beautiful habitats. I'd say they're probably my favorite. Sharon knows that.
She just
Grasslands
likes
and
wet
turlots.
places.
Yeah, I do. I do like wet places. Um, and another person asking if you can dig a pond to sort of, if you want to de-rush an area. I know I've definitely seen people do it because I've been to sites where people have dug ponds and it does certainly help drain the land around it. I don't, but it depends on your preference as well. Like if it's your garden or something, then of course, like then you get a pond and you get a bit more usable land. Um,
You won't
yeah,
have rushes in the where the pond is generally. You'll
yeah.
have it all around it. There's just a couple of things come up. Aoife, yes, I must come and look at your field of rushes sometime if I get the time. Meadowsweet and sorrel do really well in wet meadows. They do meadowsweet and actually purple loosestrife, which can do really well in wet grasslands and is
Mm,
beautiful. But if you don't manage them at all, as they found on the Shannon Callows, meadowsweet will also take over completely. It has a competitive advantage if there's no mowing and no grazing. So again, it's sometimes that thing about herbivory and livestock are important because they help to keep the diversity in a grassland. A field of meadowsweet in something that's got nothing else around it, it's not the worst thing, but it can actually displace lots of other plants which would have been supporting different species because certain insects, their larvae will only feed on certain groups of insects. So if the meadowsweet takes over, you're going to lose maybe other species that were supporting, other plant species that were supporting other invertebrates along the way.
mm. We have a final question there in the Q&A, back to sort of unwanted plants. If I cut back a large cherry laurel tree, can I leave the cut branches logs to lie there, or will it reroot itself? Sharon, maybe you can.
Yeah, I actually know Noreen's garden. I did a plan for nature there as well. Cherry laurel's an awkward one. Now, if you do have cherry laurel, like people always go on about poisonous plants, cherry laurel is poisonous. It produces cyanide. So you have to be very careful when you dispose of cherry laurel, where you dispose of it. In terms of it actually rerouting itself, I can't remember, is the honest truth, but
It,
it will resprout. And I believe it's one of the ones that if you cover the stumps to try and cut the light out to stop resprouting, can actually resprout off its root system. There's quite a lot of information. Um, there's a whole group in Wicklow that have been working on getting rid of cherry laurel in woodlands, so I can look that up again. Yet you can. I mean, I have heard you can burn the wood, but you
you
need
can
to
burn it
dry it
after
after.
a year later.
After a year, yeah.
Cyanide
Uh,
disappears. Yeah, yeah.
have you more information on the cherry laurel? It probably is one of the ones that I'd recommend drilling and um, injecting with herbicide to try and kill it because of the
Well, if
root sprouting.
because of the root sprouting, but I mean, ideally, again, that's using glyphosate, and I always wonder the long-term impacts of that. But it depends on the space. So we've got
Mm.
a lot here, but I know that they've brought the diggers in because they've got space to really dig out the roots. But yeah, you've got to be really careful with resprouting. It's so
Yeah,
hard.
I mean, you could cut it down. What I do is try and shift it to somewhere, maybe put plastic or put something Hessian underneath it, and try and get it to one of your drier places, and
Mhm.
just keep an eye on it. even with some stone or something underneath. If it's not in contact with the ground, it shouldn't reroot. We'll have to look that up. But I certainly will get it off the wetter areas. And what you could keep doing is, if it as it resprouts, let it maybe get up a foot or something, so it's using energy from the roots. Cut it off and just keep cutting, keep cutting, keep cutting, and hopefully that will take the energy out of the roots without it thinking to resprout off its roots. I'm not 100% sure though.
And I don't understand why it's planted in so many places. It's so bad for our insects. They just, you know.
We'll take a final question and then we'll probably wrap up because it's almost 9. From Michelle, any advice for dealing with I can never say this, I forget how to pronounce it. Cotton Easter.
Cotoneaster.
Cotoneaster, there we go. That's why every time I hear it and I think I gotta remember how to pronounce that one. Sophia, do you want to, if you have any? No
advice on
no advice on that one.
Sharon. Cut it back and dig out the roots.
There we go.
I would. It depends where you are as well. I mean, some of them, particularly the low ones that were promoted a lot for ground cover, they spread a lot. The birds feed on the things, and it can be a problem, particularly in limestone areas. It's a problem in parts of the Burren. Now it's starting on some of the hills, and because they sort of arch out and root a bit like the brambles do, they're taking over areas of our Mountain Avens heaths, particularly around Abbey Hill. Some of the others are not so invasive, but you never know. I have seen again another garden in the Burren with taller species, but they were spreading. They were popping up all over the place. So if there is a risk of them spreading into good habitats around the place and taking over, I would just cut them down and dig out the roots if I could. You might be able to cover those roots again with heavy black plastic or sheeting to cut out the light, so that it won't regrow again. But I'm not 100% sure. Yes, the Burren, unfortunately, get rid of it ASAP. Hate the stuff here.
All right. We'll probably wrap it up there then. Thanks so much for presenting and joining us, Sophia. I was wondering if you wanted to say any final words or talk about anything particularly, or if your research is going to be published anywhere that people might be able to find it.
I'm busy trying to write papers at the moment. But just to say, I think the one thing that really struck me is how easy it is actually to support biodiversity. You don't need to spend lots of money. It's just leave it alone. Nature's so clever. You might not necessarily get the species that you want, like exactly that question about the rushy meadows or the grassland meadows. But every area, every site, however small, is really important for biodiversity. If we can all just do a little bit and join up all those little dots across Ireland, it would be fabulous.
Great. I can see that we're very lucky to get you on the project with us.
I have so much to learn listening to Sharon, and it's never ending. It's never ending.
It's never ending.
Yeah, it's never ending. I think, and everybody feels like they have something to learn when they listen to Sharon. So
absolutely.
I just still feel toe out of the water at times, but it's just the one thing I would say is you're never going to, again, a lot of people are frightened of doing anything because they're frightened they're going to make a mistake. You're not less likely to do damage to the planet by taking your foot off the pedal than you are by going in and over managing things.
Yeah, exactly. Do less. It's easier anyway. So yeah, we'll wrap it up there, and this is all been recorded. So if anybody wants to rewatch any of it or check back any facts or anything, they can go to our YouTube channel, and I will post the link in the chat for everybody. And we will be having another Hare's Corner second Monday of next month, which is May 11th. I won't be here, and
And
the
I won't
topic
be
is,
here.
and Sharon won't be here, unfortunately, but we'll get someone very good in to like give you some knowledge. So yeah, the topic is TBD, but you can sign up to be notified about it there on the final link there. And yeah, just the final obligatory note that obviously the Hare's Corner is part of Burn Bio Trust, and we actually we have a Burn and Bloom, our festival, held in the Burn next month in May, where we'll have talks and walks and everything every weekend. So if you want to, I don't know, take some lovely walks around the Burn and learn some more, you can go to our website, and there's loads of events up there for you to choose from. It's basically every weekend in May we have a bunch of events. And if anybody wants to become a member to support us or link in any way, you can go to the Burn BO website or go to the Hare's Corner website and get in touch or sign up to our mailing list. So yeah, thanks so much, Sophia, and
Yeah,
thanks, Sharon, as ever. Okay, bye everybody.
Thank you very much for inviting me on. It was great. Good
Bye.
luck.
Okay, thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.